up, did you have a favorite wrestler? Maybe the Ultimate Warrior, Macho Man Randy Savage, Bret the Hitman Hart, Jake the Snake Roberts, or Freedom Wallace? Okay, if that last name doesn't sound as familiar, then you must not know about Junction City Wrestling, a Toronto-based web series in its second season starring wrestlers who train mostly out of Battle Arts Academy in Mississauga. They hold events for now outside of Shacklands Brewing Company, and they aren't showing any signs of stopping. I chatted on the phone with the show's main villain and producer, Andrew McRae, who in the ring goes by Freedom Wallace. So first, I want to know, how would you describe Junction City Wrestling?
The first word that comes to mind for us is retro. Old school throwback. We're not so much about the insane risky dives off the top rope. We're more about the characters and the stories that play out. When we do the shows, we obviously also film them, and then I produce episodes. So last year we had season 1, which had 12 episodes. Those are all on YouTube. And then this year, season 2 is in progress. There are 4 episodes that are already online, and then this Saturday we're going to tape the next 4, so that'll be episode 5, 6, 7, and 8. And yeah, it's more harkens back to the wrestling of my childhood. So we're talking like, the early 90s, but obviously I'm trying to appeal to people, now it's maybe dads that have started families, and they used to watch wrestling as far back as, the mid 70s into the 80s, into the late 80s, and they all have memories of going down to Maple Leaf Gardens and watching Maple Leaf Wrestling and characters like the original Sheik. And then obviously as you get into the 80s, you have Hulkamania and some of the moves that you see today on many of the other independent wrestling shows, the guys hadn't even thought of back in the 80s, nor were they capable of executing some of the stunts and maneuvers that you see. That's not to say that we don't have world-class athletes in Junction City Wrestling, and there are guys that can do the flips and do the stunts, but it's more about the fans caring about why the guys are wrestling. Why am I cheering for this guy? Why don't I like this guy? And we really the audience reaction is most important to us. On a lot of the shows that you see around town, the audience never boos. So they're more into the moves that are being done. And so it's all just a challenge of who can do the most exciting flips and who can pull off the most exciting stunts. And then in that sense, wrestling gets more dangerous. And for us, it's more about getting the audience reaction and getting them to care about who they're watching in the ring.
Who comes up with the storylines each time?
So that should be a secret, but it is ultimately me who writes all the stories out and figures out where we're going to go next and who's going to wrestle who and why and who's going to be the bad guy, who's going to be the good guy. And in some cases, those ideas come to me months ahead of time, and then they play out over months. And then in some cases, just due to the nature of professional wrestling, they always say on posters, you'll always see cards subject to change. That's because you never know what's going to happen. And sometimes ideas will come on the day of a show. Last season, for example, on our August show, I wound up getting kidnapped and put into the trunk of a car. And there was a car chase that played out at the end of the show. And that was really an idea that hit me at intermission that day. I took a look out into the parking lot, noticed the cars were set up where they were. And I was like, okay, the conclusion of this show is I'm getting put in the trunk of that car. You guys are getting in that other vehicle, and there's going to be a car chase. You
said you guys are kind of, I wanted to say rehearsing, but you guys are training multiple days a week. What, if someone like me, for example, wanted to get involved in Junction City Wrestling, what would I have to do?
When you say rehearsing, that's not really the case. There's a lot of improv that happens in the ring, but we train to be able to improv when we're in the ring. Most of the professional wrestlers that are in Junction City Wrestling also cross-train in several other actual martial arts. So then when we do our shows, the presentation looks as realistic as possible. So the training regimen is just like any other professional athlete. Most of the guys are in the gym 5, 6, in some cases 7 days a week, some cases multiple times per day. And in terms of deciding who's getting opportunities, I'm essentially basing that off of who I'm seeing work the hardest.
Wrestling really has stood the test of time. I mean, it has gone through many iterations and forms, but I'm thinking of the popularity of the show Glow, for example, which kind of brings up those nostalgic days of yore when it comes to wrestling and really crafting a story.
And I feel like that show has helped with the current surge in popularity with just, everyday people wanting to go check out a wrestling show. And Junction City Wrestling is not the only show in town that is appealing to the masses, so that's helped. And that's another way that some of those warm and fuzzy memories have come back for people, where they're like, oh yeah, I remember being 10 years old in 1985 and loving wrestling on Saturday morning or Sunday afternoon.
Follow Junction City Wrestling on Facebook or at Wrestle Junction on Twitter and Instagram. And September 29th, catch Oktoberfest from 2 to 6 at Shacklands Brewing Company at 100 Symes Road.